This is Pros and Cons. It is the first episode, the inaugural episode. It took me a while to come down from heaven, you see, and the fall wasn't very graceful, but I'm back. It just took me a little bit, and I've brought with me two great minds of Counter-Strike. To my left is Mauisnake, and to my right is Elmapuddy. And you've already seen their content because obviously, if you clicked on this video, you know who these guys are, right? I think they're, at this point, pretty much staples of the scene. Elmapuddy, I wanted to throw the floor initially over to you. I know that both of you guys have been making YouTube content, analytical content, breaking down some of the stuff that we've been seeing at IM Cologne, and you got plans to make more. So was there something specific over at Cologne, which is the first LAN? It's back, baby. CS is back, it seems. What's your take overall, if we had to guess? Some of the teams. I can actually guess one team from your neck of the woods that you might be excited about. But I was curious if you had any immediate narratives you wanted to pull on when we get into this.
I mean, I'm excited about NiP.
Okay.
I like what they're doing with Ancient. I like what their map pool is right now. The fact they're just going in and picking that map and they're winning it. I mean, they lost yesterday to Gambit in the best of 3, but they took Ancient away. So I kind of like what they're doing there. I think they're taking advantage of the fact that a lot of these teams are going to be, they've got themselves in an okay position on Ancient, but they've really just positioned themselves at the top, and it's giving them a huge advantage in some of these vetoes. So I'm looking forward to see what they do going through the rest of the tournament, and I've got them as maybe a dark horse coming out here, coming through the lower bracket, and potentially taking some names getting deep in this tournament. So I'm excited for what they're doing, and I think they're showing some new stuff, and they look pretty motivated on LAN, so that's probably a team I'm really excited for going forward.
All right. Mauisnake, what do you make of NiP? Because obviously a big talk of the town is, of course, Device. And he's been the talk of the town for a very long time. Their PR agents are getting the most out of that acquisition by the looks of it. So what do you make of this move? Because I was a little dubious, and I think a lot of people in general were. Maybe you can speak to what your thoughts were going into this tournament. But, obviously, LAN, he's a storied veteran. He's done so much in the game. So you can't really doubt him in his home environment. But were you impressed by his, obviously you made a video about him, so I'm sure you have some things to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one hiccup was at IEM Summer when they brought in Linus and they looked kind of shaky. I mean, Device in particular, his form was not what you would expect from a world-class player such as himself. So I think that right now he's like fitting into his role a little bit better. I like that on T side. I'm seeing him rifle a lot because I mean he's always been a very proficient rifler, but he actually sometimes just straight up doesn't pick up the op at the end of a T side round, even on maps where you'd probably think like you could probably slot an op there. So I like that he's coming into his own. He's being very valuable. He's being just very versatile, and I think that NiP right now, what's cool about them is that I'd say a year ago, I think their style was just not quite as proactive as some other teams, but I'm seeing more and more just the plans of NiP round to round. I'm seeing how it feels like they outline contingency plans in rounds a little bit more, whereas I think they used to be a little bit more like wait, see what the opponent does, and then kind of just make a read and kind of go pretty hard into that read on a round. I think now that they go their tempo is a little bit quicker, and I think that they are consistently like putting a plan B in a round, like a person on a lurk or something that gives them info. They consistently have just like better ideas about how they want to start rounds too, because I feel like before it like I think their CT sides have improved just drastically with Device, which I don't think is much of a surprise. So I don't know if NiP, I can see them getting out of this group. I think that VP is going to be pretty tough for them, although VP have been pretty rocky lately. And then the winner of Big Liquid, I think that's a really like that could be the winner, or that could be like the losers final of this group. Like this, I almost feel like between Big Liquid, NiP, VP, I might put NiP as like just like it, they're all so close right now, actually. But I think they might. I think they might be worse than Big in my eyes today. I think Big is probably the best team of these four right now for me.
What do you make of that, Elmapuddy? Any of that stick out to you, or do you generally agree with that assessment?
Big is the big, big is the big kind of hurdle for them to overcome. I was a little bit concerned about Big coming in to LANs, just because obviously they had that whole they're in Germany right on top of the server when they're playing online. But Big have always been a great tactical team. So I'm not surprised they were able to carry some of that form over, and I think that they will probably beat Liquid, but that'll be another good game. And then I actually have NiP beating VP. As Maui said, they've fallen off a lot recently. VP tend to play this very gambly style of CS where they kind of stack one side, and a lot of the time you're watching it and you're like, I'm not really sure why they've made this stack, and then it will just be correct. And they'll just have 4 people there. The other team will walk into the site, and I'm like, I don't know how they've done this, but they've done it. So they're always a scary team to come up against because you could quote unquote be the better team, but if they get their gambles correct, they will just beat you. So they're always kind of that team where you hate to play against them because it's hard to kind of be confident going in because you just have in the back of your mind the whole time, are we going into 4 people here, or are they just going to be randomly in these positions? So yeah, I think there's a couple of hurdles for them to overcome, but as Maui said, I agree that they have great plans going into rounds. I think that's one of the strengths that they have on Ancient that I mentioned is you can see very clearly what they want to do in each round. Like they have their map control where they take outside that B site, they take that hallway, they clear it out, so they've got that little side alley, and then they might pivot back to A, but normally end up finishing B, and they just make sure they have a good plan. They know they want to play their after plants, and on CT as well, they know they want to take middle and have all that done. So I think they have a lot of these great plans, which, as Maui said, is somewhat new. Not super new, but they are getting better at that, and yes, I think they have a great plan going in, but again, VP, if they just gamble the right way, it doesn't matter how good your plan is if you're running into a stacked bomb site. Yeah. So that's going to be an interesting game for sure.
I've just hated VP's mid rounding for a while. I think, their mid rounding. I've it is a love-hate relationship with me because, like you say, sometimes they just guess right, but sometimes they just guess wrong. Like it seems like it's just off this little just barely this, I don't know, sliver of information. They just decide, all right, guys, 4A, let's just do it, and it's like. There's still 45 seconds left in the round, guys. Like you can maybe do a little bit more this round and before you go all in on the gamble. And oh man, the way they play T sides too, especially with man advantages, sometimes if the round slows down and they didn't convert quick enough off of the picks that they got, they'll just send out feelers on both sides of the map simultaneously. And I always really question if that is a strong play, because I think kind of fundamental numbers Counter-Strike, you were supposed to group up, use your numbers advantage on T side to hit a bomb site and overwhelm the CTs because you'll have more people than them. But it's almost like they're feeling it out to make sure, are we getting gamble stacked against? And usually against a lot of these teams, they aren't. So they are just sending 1 or maybe even 2 players to just walk to their deaths. So I've seen them lose some man advantage situations when I'm just kind of like, James, I just kind of wish you played a little bit more sound numbers fundamental CS sometimes, but that's their style, and I think that's why they're probably a pain in the ass for everybody to match up against.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a tough team to match up. One of the things that I kept noticing when I was watching their CT side against Complexity in the Overpass game that literally just concluded because the game went forever into the night.
Yeah.
That game obviously had a ton of situations where VP almost let Complexity back into a recovery to OT to maybe take that third map and stay alive in the tournament. That was elimination point, and they were still calling 4 people go B. We'll have only an op holding A against pistols, and it happened twice in a row or something crazy, where really it was a point where Complexity could have actually taken it all the way to tie game, which is not what you want, and that's something that gets pointed out often enough because it is so perplexing when you're just watching and you're an analyst or you're the color caster on the desk, as Haka was in this case, and you'll get through a situation, you'll be like, why did that happen? How did they even get the bomb plant down there? You watch it back, oh, it's because James was by himself, which is actually kind of uncharacteristic. You'd think he would want to get set up because his reputation precedes him. He's the save master, but he doesn't really come into some of these games on CT side with the same game plan. And obviously as the caller as well, you have to wonder how much of that is up to him and whether or not he's responding to mid rounds. The one point that you brought up recently, Mauisnake, that was interesting to me was about the feelers moving out across the map and trying to get as much map control. See, are we getting gamble stacked? I wonder if that's them playing a psychological game on themselves because they gamble stack teams so many times. It's almost a style they're known for, and I wonder if their default position is that's how other people do. But it does feel like almost a misread of their opponents. So it's one of those things where when you see it, you're seeing a VP game. That's nameplates off. I know who these teams are. But when they're up against a team like NiP, obviously to go back to Elmapuddy's point from earlier, all of the different things that now can be done in the map pool where trains removal actually hurts VP disproportionately. Ancient seems to be picked up pretty well by the ninjas in pajamas by comparison. So yeah, I would actually favor them over it, but I suppose I see where you were coming from initially when you brought them up as a contender, Mauisnake, that VP are going to be difficult to contend with. So we come down on that one. It looks like the lower bracket match. We're all seemingly favored for NIP in this situation. But what would be the win conditions in this exact matchup, do you guys think, for something like an NIP VP? If VP were going to, quote unquote, upset and take it, what do you guys think?
You wanna take it, or
I'm just thinking what the win conditions are. I haven't watched enough games, but
Sure.
I think it just, I mean, as you said, I think you just got to be kind of aware as NiP. And I think they're one of those teams that are pretty well prepared. I mean, Threat is known for doing a great job with his teams. So they're going to know that VP do what Maui said, send these feelers out, they stack. So I'm sure they'll have a strong game plan for not getting caught off by this kind of thing, even though it can still be very difficult. So I think as long as they're well prepared and they're not moving too much in their CT, because if you get caught potentially, I guess, moving more than you need to, that's when these feelers start to come into play. They catch you a little bit out of position, and now they've just completely blown open around. You're out of it. So if you're able to just kind of hold your nerve a little bit longer, potentially just look for these guys walking out in these different positions, you can get yourself back into rounds. Or if it's just a round where it's already just like a 5v5 or a 4v4 or something, you can just give yourself the advantage. So I'm sure that'll be something that'll be emphasized. And I think if NiP come in doing that and do a good job of just sticking to themselves and not panicking or moving too much, they'll be able to come away with this one a little bit more comfortably than they would otherwise. So I'm sure that'll be well prepped. And I think that's one of the big things that's a win condition for NiP.
I think the vetoes are just really favorable for NiP also in this. They want to play. Yeah. They've liked playing Mirage, which I think they would beat VP at. They like playing Ancient, which they would probably beat VP at. The Overpass is something in the beginning they were pretty good at. I don't know if they've really. I think they've kind of been okay with it lately, but they're actually no, they lost to Liquid on it, although it was close. I think that based off of what I saw today, I think that NIP. If I want to answer your question about what are VP's win conditions in this one, I think that VP would have to win, like an Inferno or something. They'd probably have to win an Inferno against them, so that'd be their one map. And then if they want to win another map, it's like I guess it has to be like a. I don't even know why.
There's not really anywhere that they can go, it feels like, in the map pool. Specifically
I think
against
they'd have
NIP.
to play better at Overpass. They just have to play a better Overpass decider. So I think, so if they want to play better, then I think that a couple players need to just like I think that Buster in particular has been having a lot of trouble lately. So if I look towards him, I think that like it doesn't feel like his decision making is bad, but it seems like his rotations right now have been a little slower than I would expect. So I don't know if that's a comms thing. I like the comms for VP sometimes just feels like they're moving a little bit slower than I think other teams would. So I don't know if that's because like Jame or Yakinder is focusing too much on what they're doing in front of them, so they're having a hard time relaying information as quickly to their teammates, or maybe that's just because like they're like it's like VP on their CT side sometimes take a while to have everybody feel out how aggressive they can get on the map. Like in the game today, it was like Yakinder and Jame were kind of aggressive early on CT side rounds, and it took until something like round 25 or 26 for Buster to finally think like, okay, I'm going to be a little bit proactive myself. But I think he needs to start doing that a little bit. Like you need a little bit more info. So I think that he needs to play a little bit better, be a little bit more confident in just taking map control by himself. So other than that, like I think a Buster step up, because he's been kind of lagging behind, whereas 2 years ago on a Vanguard, he was one of the best 3 players on the team.
We're going to move on to talking about Big in a moment, but I wanted to ask Elmapuddy if you had any other final any last word you wanted to give on the VP NIP matchup that seems to be coming out. Like we all said earlier, we seem to favor NIP here, but VP got a puncher's chance, or what do you think?
I think it's unlikely. As Maui said, the veto just favors NiP so much as well. It's just such a big thing. I think Overpass has to be that third map, and I heavily favor NiP on that. I haven't watched enough VP recently to comment too much on their form. I just know it's been down. because frankly, watching them does frustrate me. So if I'm if I'm gonna pick a game to watch afterwards, I might pick something else. So, but yeah, I think NiP have got this one coming through.
I won't lie, when Complexity did throw that lead on Dust 2 and get us all the way out to the point where VP are now further up in the lower bracket, like, I don't know that Complexity would have matched up very well against NiP either. I think it might have been a more interesting matchup, but it probably still would have gone the way of NiP. I still think it would have been more entertaining to watch potentially than watching another VP game. So a little bit of my like selfish, like, why VP? Why did you have to win the series? But obviously they were still the better team on the day in that sense. So they matched up pretty well. We'll talk about Big. You guys both brought them up a little bit. And obviously, Mauisnake, you said that they might be the top dogs in the lower bracket overall. Am I correct in completely writing Liquid out of that matchup? Because they have a lower bracket matchup, and it feels like to me, Liquid have been hot and cold themselves, mostly on the colder side, it feels like, to get to them a position where they're in the lower bracket to begin with. And now going up against Big, who, yeah, okay, they fell to G2, but that was like a pretty solid series, a pretty solid showing, in my opinion. And I feel like now they've been revitalized. They've got a lot more confidence going into this particular matchup where I just don't, I feel like something's missing from the Liquid side on like the man management side of things. And it feels like it has been for a little while. I know they just swapped in Adran. I know they've been trying to change Stewie into the IGL again, but like, do you think that Liquid is almost a foregone conclusion and Big is definitely going to make it through here? Or do you have a devil's advocate? What do you think?
I think Liquid could definitely steal it. I think for me, Big are the favorites for sure. But something about Liquid is that, like, I don't know why they think their Dust 2 is their best map right now, because they keep picking it in series. But Big really love Dust 2, so we can see that map come out. And whatever the hell Liquid are practicing when they were boot camping coming into this tournament, maybe it comes out. Maybe it comes out in the matchup versus Big, because sometimes it takes a little bit. Like, you go into a tournament and you think that this is our strongest, this should be our home map. And what Liquid probably will do is I would say they won't pick Dust 2 into Big. They think that Big should probably pick that into them. And then sometimes it's one of those things where it's like, because it's not your pick and it's your opponent's pick, you kind of play with a little bit more freedom, a little bit more like,
you're not necessarily supposed to win or whatever, right? So
yeah, we'll have our game plan on the map, but we're not going to feel as down and out if someone makes like a single mistake that throws a wrench in our plan. I think the mentality sometimes when it's your opponent's map pick frees you up a little bit. So I think that there's a chance that somehow Liquid wins D2, and then like Big's Inferno has been pretty rocky, so Liquid could lean into that. I think in terms of the maps, like there's enough overlap between both of these teams that you could see Liquid winning this one for sure. It's just about who's going to be peaking at the right time. Are Liquid's little set pieces, they're like their staging of rounds, can it catch Big off? I think that Big right now are a little too sharp in the majority of stages in a round right now, though, to lose to Liquid. But yeah, I mean, like, it's just impossible to count out Liquid when they have some of the personnel they do.
Sure, yeah.
I will say though that like Fallen and Grim have left something to be desired, although I think Fallen, surprisingly, rifling has been a valuable kind of entry on certain rounds for Liquid. So like he's overperforming for my expectations, but I don't know if that's necessarily good enough to beat a team like Big. Him just playing a little better than I would think with a rifle.
Yeah, it feels almost like Fallen on a rifle is like Amanek on an op or something. It's like, okay, you might be able to do this, but I don't know if you're going to be able to do this at top competition. Elmapuddy, what do you make of the Big Liquid matchup? And if you had to, like, I think the Big are the favorites coming in pretty clearly, but what do you make of Liquid's chances? And did you have anything that you saw the last time you took a look at them that made you think, maybe I know what the problem is, and maybe phone up Adren and whisper in his ear? Anything come to mind?
Nothing super particular. I think what Maui said, there's a couple of good points. I think I agree with the Grim and Fallen leave a bit to be desired. I think we saw one map where Grim just went bananas and just killed everyone.
I think his first overpass matchup, yeah.
He just destroyed, it was insane. But then after that, he just disappeared almost. So I think you're looking to find some consistency in him. Obviously, I was in NA all of 2020, and I know how good that guy is. Grim is scary when he gets going, and you just don't want to fight him. Like, you're just like, oh, where's Grim? The player's like, I don't want to fight this guy because he's just so sharp sometimes. So I think you've got to try and get him to a position where he's feeling more consistent, feeling more comfortable, So that'd be one of the things that I'd be looking to do if I'm Adren or maybe I'm Fallen or just one of those more mature players in the team is trying to get him comfortable because I don't know if it's his first LAN. Maybe you'd know Maui, but
I think with Liquid, it's his first LAN.
Yeah.
yeah, it's probably his first like big international
First
LAN,
tier
right?
one,
So it's
yeah.
probably so he's probably feeling a bit nervous. Like that's something for him. So I'd be looking at, as I said, trying to get him in the groove. And that's kind of a condition I want to see coming out from Liquid if they are going to try and pull some of these games through. The other thing I agree on fully is that I think we'll see Dust 2. I wouldn't be surprised if Big just straight out pick it.
Yeah.
And I think that if the winner of Dust 2, in my mind, kind of wins the series.
Okay.
Even if it is Big who pick it, if they win it, I see Liquid struggling potentially to win 2 more maps back to back. It's not impossible. I think we could see maps like Vertigo come out, which are good for both teams. That could potentially be the third. And that could be possible, but I just think Dust 2 kind of swings it more in Big's favor.
Yeah.
But it just gets said every time, and I feel like I'm going to be repeating what everyone else says, but the individuals on Liquid, you just can't count them out ever. As I said, if Grim wakes up or Elise just goes ham, it's just again another scary team to play against. You don't know what Liquid's going to turn up sometimes, seems to be the thing.
Yeah, I think by the time that the matches tomorrow close out, we're going to have no matter who goes home, we're going to have some surprisingly early exits in some cases. And I wanted to quickly sort of go down that rabbit hole because there were a number of teams that didn't even make it into the event. And then there's some teams that I expected to place higher, like obviously Mousesports bowed out, FaZe Clan bowed out after a really impressive initial showing. And I felt it was kind of like, if you're going to play that well early, like surely this is premature. It seems a bit weird. But obviously they were victims of like the 2-1 curse again, it seems like. But they finally broke their loss streak at the very least. So like, there's some positive spins you can put on these. But were there any, like, I'll start with you, Elmapuddy. Were there any specific teams that you saw bow out already that you were like, oh, they could have done more? Like, I wonder what happened there. Like, anything come to mind as like a surprising exit early on?
I mean, the biggest one to me is OG in the play-in. The fact that they just lost 2-0 to Renegades is kind of baffling to me. Obviously, as an Australian, I want Renegades to win.
Sure.
But they should not be beating OG.
Yeah, come on.
In any universe, they should not be beating OG, never alone 2-0. So that's pretty concerning to me, particularly the fact I think OG have had good form recently. Then they finished second at an event recently.
Summer, I think it was Summer.
I am Summer. So the fact that they've just disappeared and lost this Renegades team is a bit concerning to me. Who'd they lose to? They lost to Big in the upper brackets. That's not as concerning. But yeah, that's the biggest one to me. I haven't watched that Renegades OG game back, but just looking at the result is the biggest one. Where if I'm in that camp, I'm thinking, all right, what went on here? How are we going to fix this? Obviously, you can have off days, but as I said, I don't want to bang too out of my boys, but even on an off day, you should not be losing to Renegades if you're OG. I don't know, did either of you guys watch that game or no, you didn't watch it?
I watched a couple of highlights, and I did see like the last half of Inferno. It was just one of those really puzzling situations where like, it sounds very reductive to say, but the stuff that I saw at least was like Renegades hitting shots that you wouldn't expect them to hit. So it's probably some combination of, like you said, having an off day and then Renegades being like peak time, like just coming straight in and just absolutely like they did get ass blasted in that series. Like it was like not even close, not even fair, I guess, a lot of the gunfights. So obviously it was a bit closer than maybe the scoreline lets on if you go back and watch it, because there's all those little intricacies, especially with the economy in the state that it's in. If you're on CT side and you get, oh, I got to save again. So that obviously will contribute to it. But for me, OG's failure here was like, on the one hand, they go up against Big, and Big have been a bit of a revelation on LAN now. It seems like that's really reinvigorated. That's why for a while they were trending downward. OG, on the other hand, are coming off of an online series, and that's obviously, they have Danish Nico and they have obviously Flames. So both of these players are a little bit less experienced, especially Flames, who seems to be like very integral to the wins that they were getting before in the online stages. So I wonder how much of a, like, it's an easy thing to, the problem is obviously it's easy to just point in, oh, the least experienced player didn't play very well on his first LAN with the team, first LAN back in a year and a half or whatever. Oh, that's probably why. I'm sure there's more of a deeper reason than that. But for me, the OG side of things, they've never really been consistent. They've never really made a lot of finals. And when they do, it feels like they're having difficulty replicating that at the best of times. And that's forgetting about the fact that now we're changing from online to LAN and they've got to readapt to those situations. So, Mauisnake, did you have any thoughts overall? Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, dude, because these games are just at the weirdest times. I
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
remember now I did see OG Big on Mirage.
Okay.
I didn't see the Renegade series, but I saw like one map of this one, and
Mhm.
it felt like I remember that OG CT side that actually they're both sides. I think Valde was just like hard carrying some of the rounds, and even when I remember Big outmaneuvered them in a couple of rounds, and then Valde still found multi-frags despite the fact that he was getting pinched from angles he shouldn't even necessarily be aware of.
Yeah.
So he was really impressive, but then like the thing is that Big with their kind of normal map control procedures were also probably individually popping off a little bit more than you would think because Keto was just devastating. I think he had just some like 3K, 4K kind of situations where he wasn't even like the focal point of a strategy, and yet he was just killing multiple people as he's kind of on a warpath. So I think I think that it is kind of like with Big, you are starting to see that on land. I don't know, like, I guess they did kind of flatline for a while, like,
Mhm.
or plateau more so. They were having trouble in the online era, and I think that has to be just like a monotony of, online play over and over again, and I think that Tabson is doing a really great job of leading by example. Like, his play has been phenomenal at some of these maps that I've caught. So, um, like her first bullet accuracy on land is just like it really shines a lot more when the registration is just so good.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that like OG not ashamed to be sent to that Renegade series by Big, but I have no clue what happened in the Renegade series, so I can't comment on that.
Sounds like it was not ashamed to get there, but ashamed to leave there. This is by the sound of
Yeah.
it. So yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All right then. So if we assume that this lower bracket matchup over here is going to finally be NiP against Big, and the favorites win the matchups that we just described, who do we take there? Because I heard Elmapuddy say the dark horse NiP, and then Mauisnake, you countered with Big. So if you had to shadowbox that matchup for us just briefly here, Mauisnake, what would you say about the Big NiP matchup? And would you have to like do you think that it will be Big, or is it that one of the even closer series to call? What do you think?
Um I think right now I want to pick Big a lot, but
Mhm.
NiP have this habit of just upsetting me. So I it's
Okay.
hard for me to, because sometimes you don't even really like have a with when I watch NiP games sometimes I don't even feel like sometimes they just win, and I feel like it was the other team that did a lot of things right, and NiP just kind of were like, we're okay with you doing all these good things because we know how to respond in such a variety of situations.
Yes.
Like so I think that the thing is that I think game planning against Big is surprisingly not that difficult once you really look closely at their kind of utility procedures. And I think that that's gonna really be tough for them. And I think NIP threw enough misdirection rounds that some players like Xantarez has been having he was having a tough time in that G2 series because things were kind of happening in multiple areas at once. And I felt like when he can hone in and focus on, what's on his screen, he's one of the best in the world at just those kind of engagements. But when there's a couple decisions that he has to work between, he sometimes has trouble picking the right initiative he needs to take, or just all in all, just focusing on the right duel. And I think NIP might have a little bit too much misdirection in rounds, too much going on for him to. He'll get lost in the blender just a little bit there. And I think that like I think the thing that NIP will always have in that is that they have the best player in the server by far, which is Device.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, I think I don't see NIP usually losing too hard to operas like Surson. I feel like his something about his style just feels like NIP will be pretty okay with receiving that. So I think I have to pick NIP just slightly, but I'm gonna I my heart is with Big. I've just watched
Okay.
so many Big games over the last year that I always feel like I want them to succeed. But if I really am being honest, I think NIP wins it.
It's NiP to win it, according to Mauisnake. What do you make of this, Elmapuddy?
Yeah, well, as I said at the beginning, I think
Sure.
NIP can come through with it. And that was just based off their form and what I'm seeing from them, more so than Big. If I'm being honest, I actually don't think I've watched a big game from IEM Cologne, so it's hard for me to comment on what
Sure.
they're doing. I know they're great tactically. They have a lot of things they do. There's not many holes in their game. They're good at methodically taking the map, doing what they want to do.
Yeah, deep playbook.
As Yeah, they have a deep playbook, and they're always they always seem to be one of those teams that's one step ahead as far as like what they want to do, not necessarily in the server, but they always have something new big, it seems like even on a map like Mirage, they might have a new little thing they want to go for, a little pick with Cerson, something like that, which makes them a team I love to watch. They've always got something that's always interesting, so I'm not sure, maybe they'll have a few little tricks if they haven't used them already getting through to this stage. But yes, I just think Nip are looking so good. They've got a good movement around the map, good control. I think their map pool's looking really good. If we compare the Nip Big map pools, there's a bit of overlap. Big seem to be relatively comfy on Ancient. Nip ban Vertigo, which is one of Big's favorite maps. So that's something that's a little bit interesting there. And then Dust 2 as well. They're both happy to play it. So I think it'll be a really good series. It'll be a close series, presume they both get there. So I think it'll just be good CS to watch. But yeah, as I said, I think Nip just got that little edge coming through.
I would have to agree with the sentiment that it's going to be a good match to watch no matter what the outcome is, just because it seems like one of those things. I mean, I know we had this somewhat recently as one of the last online tournaments, might have been summer, where G2 met up with Gambit, and I was like, finally, we get to see G2 against Gambit, and it's going to be like a good matchup. It's a matchup we don't see too often, so it's not like those people who are sour grapes about like Navi Gambit having like 6 series in the last month or something. Obviously, you don't have that to complain about in this sense, but then Gambit just 2-0'd them, and it wasn't even close. I was like, God damn it, G2, why you got to do that to me? But in this case, I feel like it'll be the opposite. I think it will probably be like at least each team can at least take their map pick, and obviously with the level of excellence from the individual players, it should be pretty fire. So when I look at this matchup, I'm thinking I actually harken back to the NiP Gambit matchup, which have you guys seen that particular matchup? That was a little bit earlier of one of the premier matchups that sent NiP to their second life in the tournament itself.
That was at 5 a.m. this morning for me, so I did not.
I
have
watched
to catch that one.
Ancient, but
Okay.
neither of the second maps.
Yeah, well, the
Second
Ancient
two
was the
maps.
one that I wanted to talk about anyway, so maybe you can speak a little bit to it, Elmapuddy, because when I saw the Ancient result, and I went back and watched a little bit of that game, one of the things that struck me about NiP's approach was that, like, I think this is actually something you said earlier, Mauisnake. I can't remember what show it was. It might have been one of your It's Server Time episodes, but you mentioned that the Gambit roster is really good at listening for all the little audio cues, and you can't do that as easily on LAN. And that was one reason why you might have been a little bit less like supportive of the Gambit roster transitioning into LAN. Maybe just a single question mark at least to throw in them. So when I saw this matchup, Elmapuddy, when I saw Gambit NiP, I thought this is a time to actually get Gambit tested very early on into this tournament, because NiP are no slouches, obviously, and Device on LAN, of course. So you know that that's going to be a good matchup. And then when obviously Ancient was the map to go towards NiP and they actually won it, I thought, wow. I mean, Gambit were no slouches on the map earlier in their time. So obviously we knew that like when they were picking it into Navi and stuff, they obviously had the firepower necessary to make good on their promise. So when I saw NiP go for it, I was like, there's got to be a good game plan. This is going to be a good map to watch. And it seems like it was actually. So what do you make of you did reference earlier that their game plan on Ancient seems to be really solid. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that for us?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Nip, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I think on T side, it seems to be a lot of just going towards B. They know what map control they need to make that work, and they just execute. They have their Molotov that they put down in that little cubby that's kind of closer to the T side, and they smoke off the 2 entrances, and they make sure they take control of that side hole area. So there's not really anywhere for the CTs to play. If you look at that bomb site, it's basically that cubby that I've talked about that they Molotov, and then there's that one pillar in the middle of the site. And besides that, when you smoke off those two like back alleys, there's nowhere really for the CTs to play. So basically, a lot of their game plan, a lot of their rounds seem to be take a bit of mid control, Molotov, use our utility, take the side alley, make sure the CTs aren't playing, and then we'll execute B, and we'll put the bomb down, and from there we're playing the after plan. Which, of course, there's the flip effect of that, where if there's not much cover for the CTs, there's also less cover for you playing that after plant. But I think that's where that side alley becomes very important on the T side, because I think you probably saw it a couple of times if you watch the matches, is they plant the bomb in that one spot behind the pillar, and then if you control the side alley, you just spam that wooden wall that's there, and you just kill anyone trying to defuse it. So it's a difficult game if you're the CTs. You can smoke that off early on your retake potentially, then try and clear out all the other different angles, and then you have to try and get into this alleyway to stop the guy there that's potentially spamming, or do you want to leave that open, in which case you're coming through those back alleys, but you also got a crossfire between anyone on site from NiP and then also someone in the side alley. So it becomes an interesting kind of game that you're playing there. I think that's why NiP have identified that as the site they want to hit most of the time. And then they like to throw in a wrinkle every now and then, which Gambit were prepared for. I remember one round, I can't remember who it was waiting for a player of NiP, who someone they just have them lurk up middle. It's somewhat similar to what we see on Vertigo, actually, where mid isn't really used so much for the overall hit.
Yes.
But often someone is just lurking through there. So you have to leave someone watching it if you're the CTs, and NiP have identified that, and sometimes they just go and hit you with all 5 players. But then they keep you honest. Every now and then they'll just have someone lurking through mid, and they'll potentially get a flank off. But Gambit were aware of that from what I saw, and they had someone there dedicated watching it the whole time. So that seems to be a lot of NiP's T plan. It doesn't sound very elaborate. They go towards A every now and then, but it seems that they definitely favor that B side a lot more. And then CT, I'm trying to think about their CT. I think their T side stood out to me a bit more, but CT, they have a good understanding of they want to contest down middle and what they're going to do with it, because obviously the CTs get to that mid area quicker, so they can molly off, smoke off the choke points and try and pressure in different ways. And they have a good understanding of if they want to leave middle, play a bit more passive and maybe try and stack on these other sides. So they want to go heavy in middle and potentially have some quick flanks, or how they want to play that. So I think their CT is interesting, but their T side is definitely kind of what stood out to me a lot more. I'd have to look at their CT a little bit close to look at their game plan. But I mean, looking at they just closed that out with 7 CT rounds in a row when they played Gambit yesterday. So yeah, they must be doing something right. So I think Device looks pretty comfortable on that map as well for a new map, and it was a map an AWP I wasn't really sure about, because there were some angles that are a little bit weird to me as an AWP, but you are kind of getting in, like, he seems to be able to get into these corridors or to these alleyways, which might look a little bit tight, but they do it in a way where you can get his first pick and still get away, reposition, do what he wants to do. So I think they've really made sure that he can AWP his CT on that map well, on a map that maybe wasn't so naturally look like a great AWP map compared to some of these others. So I think they've done a great job with that map. And yeah, I guess that's most of what I've really noticed without going back and looking really thoroughly through a demo.
I see one stat, but I mean, you're the one that you guys watched it. I didn't. On NiP's CT side of Ancient against Gambit, they had 50 ADR from utility per round.
Yes.
So that sounds insane. I'm probably gonna look back at that. How do you get that high of a number?
One of the things that I noticed about the nade usage, and just in general, like, obviously they chained together so many rounds because they sort of knew the opponent. At first I thought, oh, wow, NiP really downloaded Gambit in that sense. They knew what to expect. But the more I think about it, the way that Elmapuddy, you just broke that down, where their T approach seems very sound, and they kind of they've, for now at least, solved how to play the map for their team, for what tools they can use. It feels more like there's enough parity between top teams that you are always going to approach Ancient in a specific way right now. Like, the meta is defined and it doesn't really vary as much as different teams' approaches. Like, you look at Complexity playing T-side Mirage is very different than another team, VP or something, playing T-side Mirage in the same sense. So it feels like the amount of strategic diversity is not yet proliferated to that level. Whereas, you look to Ancient and you look to specifically the way that NiP were able to neutralize it. For me, it felt like Gambit were trying to do the same thing that NiP was doing on T side, and because NiP knew what they were doing on T side, they could just answer back, and they almost caught them at every point. So that's probably more fuel for the fire when you look at the nade stat that Mauisnake brought up, where it's so much ADR, ridiculous. Did you notice anything about their nade usage? Maybe that brings something back from when you watched the game.
I think they would have got a bit on their T rounds from just that Molotov in the cubby.
Yeah.
Gambit had a game plan going in where they seemed to, I think it was Hobbit a lot of the time was playing in that cubby, and then they'd wait for this execute to come up from NiP, and then they'd smoke him off to try and create, they're trying to actually hold the site like that, like kind of a Hobbit in a smoke, trying to cause misdirection, then have people coming through and trying to fight. So I think they probably got about 20 or 25 util just from that Molotov before they put it out on Hobbit's feet. But I think you're right about that. On their CT side, they know what Gambit are trying to do. They know where are the important spots for them to come through, or maybe on these retakes, where are the important places that Gambit need to hold on to play these retakes, and they're just putting utility there, doing a lot of damage in that. So I think you're spot on when you say that the meta seems to be somewhat defined. I'm sure we'll see it shuffle up at some point where they're playing. Yeah, but NiP understand, all right, this is what they're doing. Let's put the utility there. And I think there are a lot of these little cubbies on this map as well that you need to clear out, and they're kind of the only spots the other team can play. So I'm sure they were putting a lot of HEs on those positions. So I think that's probably why they had such a high ADR.
To me, one of the things that sticks out, we could talk briefly about Ancient because I'm curious as to your guys' takes on it now that we've actually seen enough games to maybe come to a more informed conclusion. Obviously, I was one of the premier naysayers. If you knew me for anything, you knew me because I made a ridiculous video where I talked about Ancient being terrible. I still don't think it's a particularly great map, but I think that Pr0s and a little bit of changes from Valve, they found a way to make it entertaining, at least as a new, fresh element, which is always going to carry some novelty, always going to carry some sort of factor that's going to make you tune in and say, oh yeah, I wonder what Pr0s are going to be doing on this. So now that we're a couple of games in, a couple of months into the map being featured, one of the things that sticks out to me is obviously, Elmapuddy, you mentioned all these tight angles. How do you do it as an op? And it feels like almost the whole map, or a lot of the corridors in the map are like, if you were an opper, it would be like if you always had to op in Bathrooms Overpass or always had to op in Inferno. Like the whole map is just Inferno Banana or Bathrooms Overpass. It does feel pretty claustrophobic. So what are your sort of like, if you had to give me your broad take on Ancient, how do you feel it's, has it like introduced something new and exciting to the game, or is it just another battleground to play on? Like, if you had to review it briefly, like your thoughts on how it's affected the pro scene specifically, I'd be curious as to your thoughts.
I always like a new map coming in. It's always interesting. I was the same when Vertigo came in. I didn't think it was a great map, but I liked the fact that we were seeing something new. And I wasn't a big fan of Cash, to be honest. I thought it was too simple. But for this map, I kind of like it. I kind of don't. I think it's a little bit not simplistic. I'm trying to think of the right word, but it just seems like there's not quite as many options as I'd like for some of the teams, both on T and CT side. I think it's the timings of things seem a little bit weird, and going towards that A site does seem difficult with that. I call it donut. I don't know what that area of the map is, like going through that. You just have to kind of entry the CT there, but then also because of the meta right now, if teams just always go towards B, the CTs don't want to really dedicate anyone to playing that position because it's unlikely that the Ts will come there. So I think there's some things on A that make it difficult for the T side to go there. But if they go there as a pack, they can just trade out some of these positions and execute. And then the A bomb site has a lot more cover than the B bomb site. So I just think I'd like to see maps a little bit more balanced, where teams go towards A and B a little bit more. Maps where they just always go to the same bomb site become a little bit tedious for me. So I'd like Valve to potentially make it so the A bomb site was a little bit more accessible from the T side, and potentially change the B bomb site out to like counteract that. Because if you just make the A bomb site easier to access, all we've done is made the map incredibly T-sided, I think. So I'd like to make the B maybe something else the CTs can do at B that make it a little bit more difficult, or the extra little something. I'm not sure exactly what to do, but I think there's a few tweaks on the map I'd like to see to make it a little bit more balanced. But overall, it's definitely not the worst map we've seen coming in fresh. I'll say that.
And obviously, Mauisnake's favorite change would be the most important balance change is changing the letters of the bomb sites, right? Isn't that right?
Yeah, I still think that it's really weird that the way that A versus B plays is not consistent. I think some people bring up the thing. I think that when you come out of spawn, like A is normally on your left as a CT and B is on your right, which I didn't even really factor into my whole video idea of why they should switch the bomb site names. But I think that I mean, I made the whole YouTube video about it, and it's 30 minutes long. But essentially, the main points are just that the access points that are gifted to Ts, usually there's like 2 at least for a T side to get into A. Like think Mirage, think Ramp and Palace, think Dust 2, think short and long. But there's only usually 1 for the B site, because think of like B apartments, Mirage, think of B tunnels, Dust 2. And so like it just feels like A should be B, B should be A. And also with the amount of interaction, the more consistent interaction towards B just seems like it's very unlike a lot of CS maps that there's like 4 people that are dedicating themselves to try to take space towards a B bomb site, which is just rare. I think for my overall feelings though about Ancient, just briefly, I think that the only thing I'd really want change right now is just moving the A site a little bit closer to the A main area,
Yes.
like the plant zone, because I think that one small change would make it much easier to plant at A for T's, and I don't think you even need to change how A main interacts, how Donut interacts, or anything like that. If you literally just shift that bomb site over a little bit more towards A main, so that you can kind of like sneak out A main, contact it, get a quick plant before the rotates come in, I think that'd be ideal. Like, it's either do that or cut off the sight line from CT spawn into the A bomb site, because it's just give me one or the other, so that you can basically plant without someone from from with fast rotators killing you while planting. And I think that would have like a domino effect where you in turn have to probably like play a little bit more towards Donut if you're a CT. You have to probably play one of your like 3B players would probably be a little bit more towards mid, or maybe it has a different effect, which is just they just fight even more for that front, like I call it Tetris, the Tetris cave lane area, like all of those, that interaction right there.
Right,
Maybe
yeah.
that's even a more hotly contested area, so that you can just gamble stack towards A even faster as a CT.
The plant zones have been something that have been definitely very controversial, I think, in this map in general. So you think of obviously the B site. I think both bomb sites, but at least B used to be smaller, and then they expanded it a little bit, and that really didn't stop the whole issue of like being very limited and being able to be caught out. On A specifically, it is more of an angle issue, I think. Like you say, if you just move it, you don't actually have to make it bigger. If you just move it, then you can't be spammed through smokes as much. You can't be, just caught down even if you don't have a smoke there. It makes the map less like Vertigo in that sense, where you're just spamming on the A bomb site. So that would be nice. Anything to make the map less like Vertigo is a good change in my book. So nice to see some, like, at least it's an easier map to fix than Vertigo by comparison, I would say. That's what it seems like to me, is like it's actually just a couple of tweaks away from at least being, the core critical issues with it. I guess the other thing that's really big that Valve still, I actually have no idea if they'll ever be able to fix this particular thing. But the fact that they have that water bug where you can just hear like footsteps from halfway across the map is obviously that's source spaghetti code engine for you. But if at least you were able to somehow fix that or remove the water or somehow make that not happen, that's probably the highest priority thing for me personally, because like I look at that and I'm like, players' careers are being decided about a bug in the engine. I guess that's the same thing as the smoke glitch when you just sit in it and you get a vision advantage, but you get the idea. It's just, we could prattle on about that all day. At least I could, but I won't. I'll spare you guys. So since lands are back, that's my next topic. There's a couple of things that I wanted to touch on here. Lands coming back have definitely made me actually watch more games of Counter-Strike than I was. I will totally checked out towards the end of watching online CS. It felt like I'm not normally somebody who shies away from watching the best teams play, and I did catch some Na'Vi Gambit matchups as a result, especially with the CIS RMR that was being played. But for me, it just felt so like one note where everything felt very similar. And now we get some land. We get to see the players actually giving themselves like high fives in studios. It does feel a little bit like you've come home in a sense. So before we wax lyrical too heavily, I did want to just ask if you guys had any immediate feelings about it. Because like ESL, in addition to this being the LAN debut, I don't know if you caught many games in the early stages of this, Elmapuddy, but they had that, obviously the vertical health bar that everybody was like very confused about. I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts on that or on LANs in general. Like anything come to mind now that we're seemingly back home, so to speak?
They fixed the health bar, because that was the first thing I thought. I opened it, I was like, how much health these people have? Like, what? It was just, I couldn't tell. So I'm glad they fixed that. That was a good change. LANs, I think it's good to just have everyone on a level playing field to start off with, just because the pings are different. But so outside of the pings, the one thing I put even more stock in is the fact that just all the teams, except for the quarantined, are together playing. It's not, you're in this country, I'm in this country, you're in another country. They're all together. This team dynamic is there a lot more. You can see them, they're hyping each other up, or if they're upset about a loss, they're upset together, and everyone is there playing as a team. They're not playing as 5 individuals spread out across a continent. And that's the biggest thing for me, is we're seeing these things come into play from teams where I think that with the stronger team bond, or I'm not sure the best way to, it's such a weird thing trying to describe, but there's teams that are together, that maybe haven't been are going to see a big boost, in my opinion. I think it's such an important thing that gets overlooked is being together, and maybe teams that have been boot camping that have had that advantage, like Gambit or NiP, right? They seem to always be together. When I was looking at the webcams, I presume that was the case all the way through. Maybe don't have that advantage as much anymore compared to teams that were spread out. So
Yeah.
I think that's something that needs to be talked about more, and you don't always realize it as a spectator, I don't think, but when you're in those teams and you can't be together, it's really difficult to try and work together. Every team's going to have its problems, and if you're not looking at the guy in the eye trying to fix these issues or getting like body language cues, it's just also important when you are in these high stress environments. You're together all the time. Even when you're at home, right? You're spending all day practicing together. Is now that these teams are all together, it's going to be easy to solve these issues, work more efficiently. So that's what I'm really excited for, and I think it will up the level of CS that we're just seeing overall. I think just the hype of LAN being back. I was the same as you. Online, I got sick of it. I just felt like I was watching the same thing over and over and over again. I download a demo from time to time, and I want to look at like how teams are playing this map, look at that. But the live games didn't interest me at all. Whereas I'm feeling the itch to watch again, and I obviously have been with IEM Cologne. So I'm really excited, and I'm happy it's back.
Any of that resonate with you, Maui?
Yeah, I think that it feels not quite major-esque, like, not that level of need to watch everything because of just how it's scheduled, like A, B, and C stream, like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's actually just, it's kind of unreal how many games are going on all the time, and you just can't you really if anybody is gonna tell me after this event they watch everything, I'm just like, "What who are you? Like, what kind of, like what do you do? How do you do that? Like, what are you eating pizza rolls and just, like, sitting in front of your monitor all day?" Like, I actually like, I would just get depressed sitting in front of my computer for seeing every game, like,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
straight up. I need vitamin D, so I know that. But basically, one thing I've really liked about LAN is I feel like it's already happened. The weak teams in the play-in kind of got weeded out really quickly, and you could just see the emotions coursing through them. I think I stayed up for that Bad News Bears Mouse Sports game, even though it was midnight at my time, but I wanted to see that BO1 really badly, and it just like, dude, some of the rounds when Frozen gets like 3 kills, and then you see the face on Frozen, he's just like, but then you see the face on Bad News Bears, and they're all like,
Yeah. You can
like
read
you
it,
could
yeah.
just see like Frozen is a cold-blooded killer, and he's been in situations of much greater magnitude than a play-in stage before. That he is just like he can keep his nerve, he can hold that, and I think it'll be kind of cool to see like other early stages of tournaments. I think the thing is that an early stage of a tournament, you kind of just see that you get more emotion out of it. You get more feel of the more confident, the stronger players, the veteran players. They just kind of feel like they've been there before in a way that just resonates in their individual play. Where online, I just like I don't know, man. I'll just see somebody take a wide swing, and I'm like, damn, that was bold. Like that looked kind of ridiculous, but that's fine with me. You know it didn't like certain teams. Like I'm not even saying like Yokinder, for example, but just like other players I've seen in the top 30. Like I'll be like real, like Flames, for example. Like I just see that dude swinging all the time for OG before, and it's like, damn, really? You're gonna just do that in like these super high pressure games
Yeah.
too? Like I was hyped about him because it was fun to watch online, but it was just like you are coming in with 0 experience and you just wide swung into B against I think it was like Glaive and was it Zipnix or Dupree or something like that. I was like, you just decided to do that against a Strawless Dry? Like that's just bonkers
Yeah.
to me. And I think in the play-in especially, you see that just players like that got weeded out fast, that they can't if they get punished for a mistake like that, I think like what Elmapuddy said that their teammate almost may give off body language that like, dude, you can't just do that, right? So they're gonna like the negative reinforcement goes just as far as the
Sure,
positive
yeah.
reinforcement at LAN.
I think it'll almost be like the hyperbolic time chamber, right? And it's like you come in on LAN, you finally get that experience. It's going to be a culture shock. You're going to rock out, some of the last places in the play-ins, or very early on in the main stage, or maybe you don't even get there like OG. And I feel like it's something that people can learn from, and hopefully they're able to adapt very quickly. But yeah, I definitely agree that was probably one of the main reasons that I wanted to watch some of those earlier games, where normally I wouldn't have that much interest in a Renegades OG matchup. Turns out it was actually a kind of a funny matchup to watch. But normally you'd be like, oh yeah, OG is going to take that all day. But now I'm like, oh, how is Flames going to be bedded in on LAN? And what are these Renegades guys doing? Are they going to be upstarts? What are they going to make happen? So there's so many different angles that you could take to pretty much every matchup that I guess the one silver lining to the scheduling being ridiculous is that if you were just looking for a match of Counter-Strike, you could basically wake up any time of the day, go to bed any time of the day. Doesn't matter. You can watch some CS, dude. You can watch them live. So shout out to the casters, man. I don't know how they did it, and the production and everybody else there. That's pretty crazy. But yeah, I think, for me, the scheduling is still a bit of an issue, regardless of the cheeky silver lining. For me, it feels rough for the players to be exiting the stage as well. So both of you guys referenced things that are reinforcing players who are like veterans of the game, who know LAN, who've kind of mastered that specific element or sub-routine of Counter-Strike. For me, I'm watching the game at a pro level because I want to see the best players play well and play at their best level. And if your games are going so late because of the scheduling, because you've booked so many different games, that you're going to have these best of threes and they don't end until 3 a.m. local time or 4 a.m. local time. Or at least they go even past midnight, I feel like, depending on the regimes of these players, the routines that they have. That might be too much by itself. So for me, it feels like that's almost ESL sabotaging their own thing. Where now, yeah, we do get that LAN play, and we're a couple of days into the tournament itself, so we get to see who's like firing on all cylinders. But then the asterisk next to it is, yeah, Complexity lost to VP, but it was ending 3 a.m. So how do you manage that one? And obviously this is the easy joke, is like Stewie 2K says 10 a.m. games too early. Yeah, he has no idea. So Elmapuddy, what do you make of the scheduling anyway? Because obviously, as a man of a different time zone, you probably have a very different perspective on this, but just in general, like, did it feel weird, for example, when you woke up and you saw Rush tweeting out like GG? And it was like,
yeah, that was very strange. Yeah, I woke up and the game had just ended. I'm like, how am I waking up in Australia and you've just finished a game in Europe? Like, it doesn't it doesn't make any sense. I don't wake up early either. Like, how is this going on? So I think that is sabotaging a little bit, and obviously there's the asterisk next to Complexity. But the other thing for me is the team that wins, they don't have to play again the next day after the game finished at 3 and the adrenaline's still pumping. You've just won a close game. You don't just bang back to the hotel, I'm asleep in like 10 minutes. Like, you have to calm down, talk, like debrief a little bit, like have your shower. You're probably not getting to bed until after 4 a.m. and then asleep maybe like 4:30, something like that. So to me, VP in this example now have to go and play NiP. I think it's today, right?
Yes.
Or tomorrow.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, and NiP have been well rested by comparison.
God,
yeah,
NiP 15 hours.
To me, Complexity and VP were kind of on level playing fields. They were both exhausted, and you can just say, VP just outlasted them. They were a little bit, like, fit is not the right term, but you know what I mean. My biggest problem is this next game coming through. Yeah, that's it's unfair to me on VP that they now have to play a well-rested NiP, and they had this game before. So that's the biggest thing I have a problem with. Sure. And I know from a team perspective as well, having these games finish, the players are just exhausted. They have to wake up the next day, and VP can't just sleep in the whole day. Like, their coaches want to get them up. We got to prep for NiP. Like, we've got to try and like work out what our game plan is here. So it's not like they can just sleep in forever and ever. They've got to get up and get themselves prepared for the next game. So yeah, that's the biggest thing to me. And then it puts more of an asterisk on my mind, as I said, and on the next game. So I'll be interested to see how VP play today or tomorrow, depending on what time zone you're in. Against NiP, because I expect they'll be pretty tired.
For me, it's very similar in a way. It's a different kind of problem, but it's very similar in its genesis. Where, like, when you had these blast games, for example, or the CIS RMR game, where win the losers finals to seed into the second place of the finals to go on against Gambit. Like, Navi had to beat Spirit and Gambit same day, and they did it, and it was remarkable. And they did the same thing, if you can cast your mind back to super early on, and I think it was the spring spring finals or something like that. The Blast, or no, it was just their whole season finals for 2020, and ironically enough, happened in like February of this year. But whatever,
Yeah.
we learned long ago in the online era that titles of tournaments do not mean anything. So.
But time doesn't matter to most individuals during the pandemic, so it doesn't for TOs either.
Yeah, we can. It doesn't. Who needs the year? So what for me that I got out of that was like Navi do have the endurance capable of doing that. They kind of proved it. For VP, it feels almost like it's unfair to hold any team to that expectation. I mean, it's obviously, when you look at Navi, it's unfair for a lot of reasons. Why is Simple still on that team, for example? That would be one question you'd ask. But when you have a situation with VP, like Elmapuddy describes, like that does sting a little bit if they end up losing. And it's almost like something in the back of their heads that, yeah, coach is going to get them up. Yeah, they're going to try to take it seriously. But there's only so much willpower you have left after a day like that, where there's not going to be an opportunity for you to take it the same way. There's always going to be that voice in the back of your head that if you bow out, it's like, well, could we really have done anything? Because like it's a very natural excuse to gravitate towards. In the moment, it's very easy to, I think, get swallowed up by that unless you really do have some mentally sound players, which, I mean, I'm not going to say they're not sound, but we would need to see that, and they would need to really have a good showing against NiP to show that. And it's also, like Elmapuddy says, it's not fair. It's not like even playing field. So what do you make of the scheduling, Maui? Because obviously it's almost been this like lurking underlying presence in the conversation of all of these games where like, oh yeah, that game that finished at 3 a.m. Oh yeah, that game that was super late. What do you make of this?
The whole tournament is just such a huge undertaking for ESL that it was daunting to think this was even possible. And then they do have that, the flaw of having 3 BO3s back to back to back, and then the first one and the second one dictate when the third one begins.
Yes.
Like that's something that just shouldn't really happen. But with a tournament of this scale, and they probably do have time constraints on it, it's more like logistically speaking, I guess they're just forced into this situation.
Yeah, they can't book the venue for more days or whatever, so they can't account for it.
Right. I mean, I suppose. I mean, you think they could.
Yeah, you would think so, but apparently that's the only thing that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is they're foregoing, like they have how long is the break? Like it's like 5 days between the group stage ending and then the playoffs beginning. I don't necessarily think it needs to be that long. I think that they have a 5-day break. Like, it could be a 2-day break, and then they could have better spacing here so that we wouldn't need to see 6 BO3s in one day from the first game tournament back on land. Like, it could be 4. It could be 4 with an A and a B stream maybe, but I think that actually the numbers probably check out there actually. But either way, I think that it makes it so unfavorable if you just have these certain draws. And sure, like I don't think there's any way that I can contest anybody saying that the playing field is not even for the NiP VP series. NiP have all day to literally just sit back and watch Complexity versus VP. They know all the tendencies of VP, and VP are not going to reinvent themselves in 15 hours. That's just impossible.
They have to prep for the other team. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, this is something that I thought might hurt Gambit too, because if they fell into a lower bracket, they rely so heavily on prep and just, they probably time their whole day so that they can fit everything in the way they need to. But if they were in a situation like VP's, I could see them just going out right now like VP are, because they got great fundamentals, they got great player personnel, but if you only have 15 hours, your coach can't like give you as much information, and your players are not going to be receiving that as well as they would if they had a day and a half off.
You look like you might have had something to say there, Elmapuddy. Anything spring to mind?
I mean, I feel like I said most of it. Like, it's just unfair. I mean, the coach probably cops it a little bit. I know if I was the coach of that team, you probably cop a 4-hour night of sleep just so you can get up and prep, and then you're exhausted in that match. But it's more important that you've prepped your team and let them rest, and then you can prep them on what you're doing. Even if you might be dead while they're playing their game, but hopefully the adrenaline tries to get you into a little bit more, and you can hopefully get a decent night's sleep the next day. So I feel sorry for the coach, because I know he's gonna get a few hours of sleep, then he's gonna have to get back up to prep again. But that's what you have to do, and as we've already said, the scheduling just a bit rough on them in this scenario.
Is real real symbiosis there when you brought up coaching, because that was actually where we were going to go next. When I saw that we were back to lands, one of the first things that I thought was, wow, Cloud9 never played a LAN. And I wanted to talk to you, obviously, about your role in that org and talking a little bit about that. Is it true, by the way, maybe, I don't know if either of you really know this, but like, I keep hearing, and maybe my sources are wrong, that Cloud9 actually didn't ever boot camp in the same facility, like at any point during that team, the most recent roster?
Heard that. Yeah, I've heard that.
They boot camped with the Woxic lineup.
Okay. So
I never met any of my players, and
Jeez.
Zeppa never met anyone except for Floppy.
Right, yeah.
So that's how that went down. Yeah, so that was one of the biggest hurdles we had to overcome. I mean, you heard me talk about how important it is to be in the same room as people, get this body language, hype each other up. We were just spread out all over. And Henry tried his hardest at one stage, and it was just, with what's going on, it was impossible to get everyone in the same country at the same time. So it should not happen. And that was a disappointing, and it made it, I guess, leave that little bit of a thought, like, oh, we could have done more, but we couldn't because it was logistically not possible.
Yeah.
But we could have done more if the option was there, and to try and push ourselves to the next level. So yeah, that's true. I guess what you heard is that final lineup that ended up being dropped never met each other. There was never boot camp anything for that.
That is crazy. Yeah. Okay. So the reason why the first thing that sprang to mind when the LAN came back was the C9 lineup was because that was in my mind. I was like, wait, if they never even boot camp, of course they never played a LAN together. The thing is that when you're put in a position, when you get the call up, right, and you're like, hey, we want you to coach Cloud9, or would you be interested? I don't know exactly how the conversation went, but when you get the offer, right, like that's an offer you almost have to take. There's not really any argument against it. It's a big opportunity, big organization, clearly like the right pieces as well. They already have a team that could theoretically have plenty of success and seemed to be on the cusp from the analysts and pundits at the time. They were seeing very close matches, lots of 2-1s, lots of lose our map pick, but beat their on their map pick and take it to the decider anyway. So clearly there could have been some more success there. Just like you said, like if there were different circumstances, if there were more opportunities. So could you walk us through a little bit about like the process of getting the call up and saying yes? Like in retrospect, does it feel like it was always going to be like a really difficult one? Like, did you take it with any reservations, or was it just all in as soon as you saw the sort of opportunity that was before you?
When you're right, when you get that call, it's not really something you're going to turn down.
Yeah.
Obviously, I just left Gen G. I didn't have a job at the time, and they like Henry rang up and said, well, this is opportunity. Like, you have to take it. Like, it's such a huge opportunity. There's a lot of hype around the team at the time, of course.
Sure.
I didn't know, obviously, some of the obstacles we'd come into. But when I got that first call up, it was kind of, they were in that transition phase where Woxic was out by the time I got the call up, but they didn't know who the fifth would be yet. Right. So it kind of happened where I was brought in, and then I had a bit of a say onto who the fifth was. And I talked to Zeppa when we were looking for players on Gen G, when we obviously lost Daps and Som. He was one of the players I interviewed. I liked his attitude. I thought he was very talented, coming from NA. And there was the added bonus, of course, where Floppy was alone in Serbia with Henry going there sometimes. So we thought added bonus of getting Zeppa would be, well, he's obviously have to move. He could live with Floppy, and that makes him living in a foreign country a lot easier if he's got a mate there to help him out. So that was one of the reasons we ended up going with Zeppa, and that was kind of, I guess, my first interaction with Cloud9. It was get in there, help them find out who the fifth was, and that happened very quickly. Interviewed a couple of players, but Zeppa ended up being the one we wanted to go with, and from there he flew out pretty quickly. Like, Zeppa was ready within a couple of days, and we were ready to start going. So that's kind of how the beginning of all of Cloud9 started. And yeah, it moved very quickly. There wasn't much time for mucking around, and obviously there was work to be done. So we kind of got into practice from there.
When you were taking up the task of coaching, like the first thing that springs to mind is how soon can I get into a room with my players? And like, if I'm in your position, obviously, and that obviously wasn't possible. Mauisnake, I was curious about your take on the initial move, because I vaguely recall you saying that like Zeppa was a strong player when he was touted as the C9. Like, obviously the rumor mill goes, it first gets tweeted out, and then there's like an HLTV article about them in talks or whatever, and then finally the deal is secured publicly and announced publicly. So like when we first heard the rumors, if you can cast your mind all the way back then, like for a lot of people who didn't really know Zeppa, who didn't really know NA Counter-Strike, this was a bit puzzling, and they almost were starting to wonder what C9 was doing on an organizational level. So I was just curious if you had any comments on Zeppa as a player himself. Obviously, him and Floppy have moved on to Valorant, but it feels like they never really got a shot at doing what they really could do at the world stage. So if you had to shadowbox them right now, like what do you make of their potential, of Zeppa specifically? I mean,
Um, I used to be biased more about what I thought between Zeppa and
mhm.
Floppy and kind of NA rising talent. I thought Floppy was like should be the guy that everybody was looking at, but I think as time went on with that roster, especially, I think Zeppa kind of proved that he was probably a little bit better than Floppy during it. Uh, I think that I think Floppy had some difficulties on Cloud9. I think like I mean I talked to him one on one kind of regularly, so I'm not going to divulge what we talk
Okay, sure,
about,
yeah.
but I will say that for just to focus on Zeppa a little bit more, I think he actually had a little bit more versatility in terms of can he play aggressive or passive round by round, where Floppy would kind of do whatever I felt like a team needed him to do, but I think he still his like center, like his most grounded state was when he got to play passive and let the action come to him a little bit more. Whereas Zeppa, I felt like he could kind of run in a little bit more and rip people's heads off. So I think that kind of makes me think that yeah, Zeppa's probably a little more versatile. I think maybe Floppy has a little bit better game knowledge overall, like situational awareness. But uh, I think when you like, I mean, I'm trying to go back to Chaos
Sure, yeah.
and what he was for them, and he was kind of like he kind of could be that X factor in rounds where, you just see him being that secondary A player on Nuke, for example, and he would just be at the, I call it I'll just call it the opposite vent, and just some like finds the perfect timing and he kills like two people with incredibly snappy aim, stays alive. He kind of ooh, do I want to? I mean, like I never really thought about this until now, but it kind of gave me like Oboe vibes in that he didn't
Mm.
need a ton of setup necessarily, but could still deliver a lot round by round. And I guess that kind of works when I think about it more and more. Like I think you could maybe compare him to Oboe in some respects. So if people saw him when he was on Complexity, I guess I wouldn't really go one to one with roles necessarily, but like if you liked what you saw from Oboe, Zeppa could kind of be that a similar force in the server.
There have been a couple of cryptic tweets from Zeppa specifically, well, and Floppy, I suppose. So that's the main reason why I wanted to linger on them just briefly, because there's an outside chance the last time we saw a cryptic tweet was from Sadakist, and he came back to CS. So you never know what might happen. So, Elmapuddy, if some of these players, because I wanted to get your opinion as with the time that you spent with them, if they were slotted into certain teams now, like how successful would they still be? Like essentially the thrust of the question is, did Cloud9 have an issue with pieces, or was it more an issue with cohesion? Because I feel like something that got lost in translation with all of the event was that a lot of the members of that team, again, like I was sort of saying about Floppy and specifically about Zeppa, that it felt like they never really got a good shot, a good crack at doing things at tier one with the quote unquote right and proper scenarios and environment and surrounded by teammates and stuff like that. So from the time that you spent with these guys, do you reckon that all of the members of that Cloud9 roster you were with could pretty much easily hack it at tier one if given the right spot? Or like, is there anything? I suppose that's a bit of a loaded question because you don't want to necessarily aggravate any fan bases. But so I'll frame it in a bit more of a neutral sense. Was there like a specific player that stood out to you as like definitely belongs tier one? Why is he not on tier one? Anything come to mind?
I think Zeppa would be more suited, particularly in the environment at the moment where NA seemingly is a bit dead. So
Okay.
just from knowing the two, I think Zeppa, just the way he is he would be more comfortable, or he was more comfortable, I'm gonna say that, moving to another country and still performing at the level he needed to. Whereas Ricky, I think he has very strong ties home. So he struggled a little bit moving away to Serbia for such a long period of time, which I can sympathize with. I lived in LA all of 2020. It was rough. Like
Yeah.
it's hard to live away from home. But I think Zeppa was particularly good at dealing with it, better than I would expect most people to be, particularly someone like younger like him. So I think if everything stayed in EU, I think Zeppa has a lot of potential. If he was to come back to CS, he could move to one of these teams, join one of these teams that are based in Europe, and I think he'd still be able to thrive. He's very good at being able to slot into a system where he needs to be. You know what you're going to get from him, and he's going to play and do what he wants to do. I think Floppy is a little bit more experienced and has a little bit more game knowledge, like Maui said. I think he's right on that. But I think that, again, I think his role is defined. He's very good at being this kind of passive lurker on the edge of the map. He lets the action come to him. He's going to kind of not let anyone, I guess, push from the other team and do what he needs to do. He's going to make sure he secures that. So I think they both have a place where they could both have potentially been tier 1 players. I think they would have needed a bit more experience to get there. If they had that time on C9, I think they both could have got there. But I think the scenario around it impacted them both differently. And that's one of the reasons I think we saw Xeppaa thrive a little bit more, is just from what I said, is the fact that he was particularly good at coping with being in a country like Serbia, which is very different to the United States. He was very good at dealing with that, which I think is why we saw him thrive a little bit more in that C9 team as time went on.
Okay, I want to ask now about Alex specifically. This will probably be the last sort of topic that we touch on before we close out the show. Alex, to me, as an IGL, is like, it's such a mystery where he's gone and it disappeared into the ether, it feels like. Can you say a couple of words about how he impacted the team? Because there were so many question marks, so many naysayers, will say. The critics of Alex would say that, oh, he had Zywoo on Vitality, so, you know, that's a Zywoo go kill. Like, there's the Immortal interview where he said something to the effect of, like, people don't realize how many flashbangs we throw for Zywoo or whatever. So he didn't look very good in that interview, and I could see why maybe some people latched onto that. In that situation, when you're hitting him with Cloud9, like, there's the idea that, okay, they didn't see eye to eye previously with the coaching staff, so Alex is like touted as the main man. He wants control. He wants to, this is just from the outside what I was able to derive. It seems like he wants to be able to be the head of the team, especially when in the server, and he's got his own strategy in mind. Can you say some words about how he sort of carried himself in that team environment and his fitness, I suppose, as an IGL? Like, it feels really weird that we haven't seen him since then. So it's curious to me what your impressions were when you worked with him.
I really enjoyed working with Alex. I think, as all good in-game leaders should, they have a very clear vision of what their system is, what they want to do, and how they want to do it. Which I think is great, because the last thing I want as a coach is to come in and tell my in-game leader, this is my system, you're going to do this, 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 and this. But then I'm not the one calling it. I mean, I guess I could have in the online era, but it's the in-game leader who calls it, really. So he needs to understand his system, and Alex does. He knows exactly what he wants to do. He's probably one of the hardest working guys I've seen. He's always, after practice, he goes and he looks at what we need to do differently, looks at other teams, works out what he wants to do, brings new strategies, and he's always looking inwards. He's not one of those guys who points fingers and says, oh, this didn't work because this player stuffed this up, or this player stuff. He's always looking, what can I do more? What can I improve on? How can I improve my system? So I really liked Alex from that point of view, and he was great to work with. And I think that he has a lot to give to it. As I said, he's really hardworking. His calls are good. He's good at mid-rounding. He has good set strategies. He knows how he wants to kind of mix those two together. But yeah, as I said, I think we had a good relationship working together where I guess I would kind of challenge him. Like, I obviously have my system and how I like to do things and what I think is important. But as I said before, I want the in-game leader to be comfortable, not me be comfortable with the system, right? So my job is obviously kind of get his system, and I want to challenge it in a way. It's like, I don't want everyone has a bias towards their own thing, right? Like, you're going to see your own system or whatever, like rose tinted glasses, right? Okay, so I want to come in and kind of challenge what he's doing, make sure it's solid, make sure it's sound, and kind of point out things that I'm not comfortable with. And he was very good at taking that. Like, when I'd say, I'm not sure about this, Alex, I think that we've been struggling with this, we need to work on this. He was very good at taking that on board and tweaking it himself and coming up with solutions that he wanted to do and where he was still comfortable to try and improve the team to the next level. So I think Alex will be a great asset to any team he's on, and I hope we see him back on a team soon, because I think he's a really good in-game leader. And anything that went on at Cloud9, if you watch those games closely, I think it's you don't really know what you're seeing if you say that the in-game leader did a poor job, or there was poor calls, or we were losing from that point of view. So I really hope we see Alex back, because he does a great job. And I don't really have too many complaints from him, really. Like,
Sure, yeah.
I just want to see him back on a top team, and I think he does a great job. And I think whatever team he does join, he'll be able to have a positive impact on them.
Mauisnake, I'm curious as to your take on this, because I feel like the immediate insight that I gained from Elmapuddy's answer is that Alex seems easygoing in the sense that he's willing to accept criticism and at least challenging and be able to work with the coach in that sense. Whereas the limited press we got about the disagreements perhaps, or the difference in vision between Kassad and Alex at the first rendition of that C9 sort of super team, if you want to call it that, for me, it felt very strange because it almost painted like Kassad leaving so early in the project and it being touted as a disagreement between him and Alex made it seem like, well, obviously one guy left and the other guy didn't. So the one who's still in the team must have had the ability to pull rank maybe, or something. Like my brain goes in certain very obvious biased directions. So the insight that I glean there is that it probably was it sounds kind of weird to say now that I'm saying it out loud, but it probably was just a genuine disagreement where it seems like they might have just been at an impasse. It wasn't necessarily anybody's fault. It was just sometimes you assemble these personalities and it doesn't work. So what do you make in general of Alex as an IGL? What Elmapuddy was just saying? Anything stick out to you?
I actually always liked how Vitality played. I actually think that I liked when Alex was the caller for Vitality versus Apex.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Alex had better much. I think his mid rounding was quite better. It was significantly better. Yeah, I think that when I watch Vitality today, though, like for example, I feel like it just kind of feels like they have good staging, and then they
Yes.
can go into just plays that they're used to going into, and I don't really think they gather info as well as when Alex was on the team. I think that their mid rounding is not like, sometimes they just have a good play and it works, but when Alex was on the team, I felt like, oh my god, like they actually outmaneuvered their opponents there. So that was that's something that I don't think Apex has developed in comparison to Alex. But when I think of Cloud9 and the flaws of the team, I kind of just think that the revolving door of not having an opera really hurt them a lot. And like
Mm-hmm.
Esatag, despite being sufficient, I don't even think he ever really reached the levels that Amanek has reached if you're for G2,
Sure,
if
yeah.
I'm being honest. I think that just, it relieves a lot of pressure. Like, I mean, we all know how valuable a great opera can
Yes.
be for a team, and like sinking a lot of the bankroll into Woxic's position on the team, and then it failing was something that it just, to me it was one of the things that I felt like Cloud9 never really overcame. And I think, but I don't think, like, when I look at the team, I don't think anybody really did a bad job with what they were given
Mm-hmm.
by any means. Like, it's just not, as a tag just isn't really a tier 1 opera in my eyes. I think he's like, if he got a year to do it, maybe he could be, or like,
Yeah.
I mean, even give him like 4 or 5, give him like 5 more months. I think he could be really quite good. But at the time when they stopped playing, like, his performance were always like, the things that would catch my eye with S tag were always like, oh my god, he hits all these wall bangs. Like, that's so
Mm.
sick. But then handling some of the other kind of like fallback routes, making sure he gives himself enough shots in the round. Like, it's kind of like when I looked at OC's demo recently, I was like, dude, this guy just shot eight rounds, 8 different bullets at Astralis, like in the same round. Like, that's incredible. But as a tag, I feel like kind of would give up on his positions a little bit quicker, maybe just fall back a little bit farther than other operas do. Doesn't go for that like cheeky like jiggle recontest, or if he did, he would die a little bit more. And so that hurt them. I think from everything I heard in the camp too, it just seemed like there was just so many external pressures for that team that when it comes down to like the close games, it feels much like more intense for them than it did for probably the other team. So I think that this is one of the times when you look at how Cloud9 were playing, and I wouldn't say that the structure of the team let them down, even the individuals let them down. It was just like close moments. You do see that kind of random individual play that cost them. So just like the composure in those kinds of moments was, for an online era where you see Gambit just hold their nerve in 2v5s, like, it felt
Yeah.
like Cloud9 didn't have that extra
Sure. Yeah.
gear.
I would say
Yeah.
that, like, for me, what it really stuck out to, like, the looking at the old Cloud9 system. You mentioned obviously a comparison to Amanek, which is, I think, quite apt because like initially when Esatag's brought in, he's not brought in for the service of an opper. Amanek in the same way, right, is much more of the classical support player if you want to go that route. And maybe it's a testament to Malik as a coach over at G2 that they were somehow able to bed in Amanek as an opper when he's not a tier 1 opper in terms of skill. He still needs to learn that if he's going to eventually, he can still write that page in his career, so to speak, if he's able to. But it's never something that you would expect. You wouldn't even necessarily expect him to have this much success to begin with. So was that like a sticking point for you as well, Elmapuddy, about the whole opping thing? Because I saw your face perk up when Mauisnake mentioned it. I was curious about what you thought going into it and maybe steps that you might have tried to take to sort of fix that potential issue.
Yeah, it was just always so there was so little time.
Yeah.
We started with Alex, right, and then swapped to Esatag with the AWPing, and it always felt like to me that neither of them were exceptional AWPers, which of course you want with like top AWPers dominating the game. But I always felt like that with each of these changes, we lost something. So when Alex was AWPing, we lost those aggro plays Alex would make, and he didn't like me calling these, but I called them his like 70% plays where. There's a 70% chance he just wins us the round. There's a 30% chance he loses us the round. But 70%, I'm going to take that. Sure, go make those plays, Alex. Like, make those crazy reads, make those aggressive plays that most players wouldn't have the balls to do, but he does. And when he was AWPing, we lost that because it's difficult to do what he likes to do with the AWP. And then when Patrick or Esatag was AWPing, I think he was a little bit better at it than Alex. It made more sense ending up. But we also lost like our best rotator, the best at coordinating different things. Like he could do that on the AWP. Like he was very good at, say, like a very simple example is when he's AWPing Heaven on Nuke on CT, he'd come to ramp and he'd tell Floppy, look, we're going to fight this, we're going to do this. Like he's very good at setting up that kind of thing. But he was also very good at that on the rifle. And it felt like we kind of lost that a little bit. But not so much because you can still do that on the AWP. So I think Esatag was a better move than Alex on the AWP, looking at it from this point of view. But as you said, we just didn't have time. Like I don't know how long Esatag was on the AWP, but it wasn't long. Like I'd be surprised if it was 2 months. I think it was probably less than that. And it's just unreasonable to expect anyone who's been rifling for the last year and a half, whatever it was, to come in and be a top level AWPer in 2 months. It's just never going to happen. So there was, as I think we lost some stuff. We lost a bit of time with the Alex thing. I think we lost stuff in the game, and then I think Patrick just wasn't given enough time to do what he needed to do on the opener. I think he could. I think he had on Heroic. He was the AWPer, if I remember correctly. And I think
he shifted roles there a little bit too. I remember like he was like opping for some tournaments, and then it just depended on the personnel because Heroic had like a revolving door of players too. So I do remember he picked it up for a bit. So. But go on. Yeah.
I think he could have done it. But again, he could have had time. And the other point Maui mentioned was the pressure.
Sure.
I can tell you that's 100% true. You'd get into we weren't scrimmers, right? But our scrims we were very well like we were good at doing what we needed to do in practice, doing what we talked about. We want to execute this way, we want to default this way. We were very good at doing that in practice. Like that we were good at like getting to the point where we're doing what we need to do. And then we'd get to these games, like the final game we played against MIBR, and it was just this pressure. And it's like, we need to win this game. This is the game that qualifies us. We haven't really qualified for anything. We'd get to these points in all these events, and the pressure would just mount, and it would just, I'd just see these and it was hard to deal with because these mistakes would just appear that weren't appearing before. So from my point of view, a lot of it, like the pressure played a big part. I think it was just a bit too much. But that's something you have to deal with, right? Like when you're one of the most hyped up teams in the world at that point, everyone's watching your games. You've got to be able to come and deal with the pressure. And that was something that we struggled with as a team. And I think that was ultimately our downfall on a couple of those series, was just making those mistakes we wouldn't normally make. And it just came down to the pressure. And I wish we had a little bit more time to work with the sports psych, because he wasn't brought in until I think later than he should have been to help with some of those players.
Yeah, I mean, from the outside, it did seem a little shocking, I guess, when you believe in HenryG as a charismatic guy. He makes all of these bombastic statements before Flashpoint, like super early on in that team's sort of tenure, right? And that's their first proper showing on the world stage. And they come into Flashpoint 2, and he said, we're going to win Flashpoint, and they don't make it to playoffs even. So that was when I saw that tweet from Alex where it said, you know, GG boys, we won Flashpoint, and it was almost like trying to play it off. And I saw he was trying, it looked like from the outside, it looked like he was trying to just parlay it, like, okay, go next, just forget about this, because yeah, that's like just the ring rust. And you're willing to give them some time, but it didn't seem like it did improve. It does feel like maybe, you know, not necessarily to single out HenryG, but it looks like it was inarguable that those kinds of initial expectation setting were, you know, we're a little bit higher than they ought to have been. I think Mauisnake, our mutual friend Josh Mix, who's now over in Nordavind, had a similar sort of take where he felt the pressure definitely played a part. So I only imagine the players must have also felt that. Maybe some of them less so than the others that were a little bit more on the young side or a little bit less on the experience side. But it definitely feels like it was a trial by fire, and not everybody's going to make it out of that. So
I think that coming in from the talent side, which Henry did and Moses did recently, like there's kind of just no there's just no accountability as talent. Like I've won prediction contests, but I've also done pretty badly in them. But I just you know, I just shake off the losses, and then I can just say I'll just say things like, I guarantee you this player will get 20 kills. They don't. Who cares? Like who cares if I didn't say that, right? But then when you're saying that about a team you're working with, it's a much different environment, because you put a pressure on yourself. It's like being the first person at LAN to shit talk across the room. If you do it on the pistol round, like what's going to happen once you start losing a couple rounds? Like people, they're going to start throwing shit back at you, right? And if you crumble under that pressure, then everybody on your team is kind of mad at you for starting it, right? Like,
sure, right, yeah.
So like it's a dangerous game to play, the one that Henry and Moses did, where Moses said, I if we don't win a major, this is a failure. I was like, oh my God, like you really set this lofty expectation for yourself here. And then like Henry said, like, we're gonna win Flashpoint 3. I'm like, or Flashpoint 2. I was like, dude, like these teams all are bloodthirsty, you know.
I think
like,
it was admittedly before like Fnatic, who
the
didn't
invited
really
teams.
Yeah, there's some.
It was before
teams
the invited teams came into the fray. Yeah, but it's just, oh man,
that's still a very ballsy claim early on, right?
Yeah, talking that talk can really get you and you in trouble, and it can get your whole like team, your whole roster kind of like, jeez, man, can this guy just like calm down? Like we're the ones that have to play right now. Like this just adds more to this.
I don't know if you had any comment on Elmapuddy. I'm not going to put you in a position where you got to talk about your ex boss, but if you had any perspective on yourself on your own that you wanted to share.
I liked Henry. I liked working with him. I think he did a good job of bringing attention to the team, right? Which I guess if you're Cloud9, the organization, you want as many eyeballs as your team.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
It did obviously add to the pressure. I think it'd be silly to deny that.
Sure, yeah.
But it obviously, like being on Cloud9 also has its own pressures involved.
Yeah, it's a big org. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, he did what he needed to do, and I think, as I said, I think bringing eyeballs to the team, right, something Cloud9 wanted. So there was that positive side of what he was doing, but the pressure did definitely add to the players in the server.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember when I brought this up on I think it was on an episode of Elo Heaven, the one that Thorin joined, where it was like, yeah, you know, and these Cloud9 players, like, they're going to be under a lot of pressure. He didn't even let me finish the sentence. Good. Get him out. If they can't do it, they can't handle it. You know, he's obviously got his own lens he's viewing Counter-Strike, but that's a pretty good. That's like in a very mad way. That's almost like the fan approach. Right? What? You can't handle the pressure of being yelled at by thousands of people on Twitter? Yeah, you know how it is. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good, solid episode of Pros and Cons. That's the first one. So thank you, boys, for joining me. I guess I'll throw it back to you, Elmapuddy, if you have any shout outs for us as we exit the episode, and anything that you want to say before you depart this lovely YouTube channel that you've co-starred on.
No, just thanks for having me. Check out my YouTube channel as well. That's about it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. Mauisnake, go on ahead. And obviously I took the shout outs from It's Server Time, so you can feel free to make note of that. But what's your shout outs? Give us the lowdown.
I'm just doing stuff on YouTube more now. I have a content plan where I'm going back to what worked originally. I tried deviating a little too much. just like getting a little crazy with thumbnails and titles. But I realized but like YouTube just doesn't like when you do that. You got to make the same. You got to use the same font every time. You got to make the same
Yep.
thumbnail every time. You got to have very similar titles every time. Pretty much the same video length too. I noticed even when I had when I first did it server time, the viewership on my channel just plummeted for everything because the YouTube was like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you making a non-player demo review?" So
yeah.
so I'm just trying to like, at this point, like I kind of don't care to like. I don't think I'm gonna catch fire on the algorithm again, but I'm gonna like try to make it at least like not in the hundreds of views, because when I see 3-figure view counts, I'm thinking like, where did I go wrong? Where was I led astray by my own hubris? So I'm gonna go back to what works.
Going back to basic, I see.
Shouts out to the algorithm for ruling my life.
There it is. All YouTubers have agreed with that statement. My shout outs before we go are just to a Fang of Extra Salt, who had an excellent podcast appearance over at It's Server Time, which you can check out on Maui's channel. That's my shout out for it, because I missed that myself as the producer who might not be able to do that anymore. I don't know. We're trying to make it work. But
It's whenever you can to just make
course.
my life easier. But
yeah. Well, that's it. That'll do it. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back at some point. I'll be back. These gentlemen will probably be back in a year or something. See you guys then.